Welcome to the 251st episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with horror writer Nicole Cushing, author of the books Mr. Suicide, The Mirrors, and others. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Nicole Cushing, author of the Sadist Bible, The Mirrors, and other works of horror fiction. Cushing's novel Mr. Suicide was awarded the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a First Novel. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Great. Can you read 2 or 3 pages from your new novel, The Sadist Bible?
Sure. It's a novella. It's a longish novella, around 30,000 words or so. But yeah, this is the beginning of the Sadist Bible. The first chapter of this is called The Covenant. Do you really think you're ready to die? I don't want you chickening out on me. Ellie thought about Laurie's question, stared at it in the chat window, rubbed her eyes, yawned. It was late. She should start packing, but she had to see this through. It was simply too important a conversation to cut short. The click-clack of keys on her ancient laptop sounded like grinding teeth as they churned out her reply. There's nothing here for me, so why not? I mean, I'm damned anyway. I think it will be awesome. Dying is the most intimate thing 2 people can do together. Ellie paused. Let that sink in. Laurie had a way with words. She was younger, but seemed so smart. Could have made it into college, but hadn't even applied. Should have gone into advertising. She could make even the most outrageous thought sound believable. Was she right? Was dying the most intimate act 2 people could share? Ellie wasn't sure. She started typing, but before we die, there will be, well, you know. I will ravish you before. We will suck things and lick things and poke things and probe things. Just thinking about it once makes me want to jill off. You won't die a virgin. I'm not a virgin. I'm almost old enough to be your mother. She hit the enter key and thought about what she was going to say next. Something pithy and sexy, and Laurie's next message plopped into the window, interrupting her train of thought. We're only 13 years apart. That's not old enough to be my mom. But maybe it is out where you live. Anyway, I know you're not a virgin. You've had cock, but not pussy. You're a girlgin. Very well, you won't die a girlgin. Ellie's eyes focused on a single word. Die. Her heart pounded. The muscles in her arms stiffened. She took a deep breath, absorbing the finality of it. How could Laurie chat about it so casually? They talked about this for weeks. Now she was getting ready to make it real. To pack. To leave. To never come back. And that's the first page or so of the Sadist Bible.
Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about the Sadist Bible yet, how would you describe the novella?
I would describe it as one, like a very simplistic kind of quick elevator pitch sort of marketing thing would be calling it lesbian Hellraiser, in the sense that some people have likened the work to Clive Barker, and there is this romance of sorts between these 2 women that's at the core of it. So like Barker has said about his novella, The Hellbound Heart, this is, he called it a very twisted love story. And I think you could say that here too. It's a story about basically 2 very wounded, broken people, one of whom is a closeted lesbian in her late 30s who's living in the Bible Belt, and the other one is a gal in her early 20s who's bisexual, also more or less in the Bible Belt. And both of them suicidal, both of them deciding to meet online and going to a place where that caters to people who want to form a suicide pact on a social networking site. And that's where they start to chat. And it's basically about their plan for meeting in a hotel about halfway in between their houses, and all the strange things that happen en route to that meeting, and their encounter with a truly wicked cosmic force along the way, and the fact that Ellie is in love with Laurie, but Laurie's not telling Ellie everything about what's going on with her, basically. She's not divulging everything that's happening in her life, including her entanglements with this wicked cosmic force. So yeah, that's how I would describe it in a little bit more detail.
Gotcha. So do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing the Sadist Bible?
Yeah, I do. It was, oddly enough, I was in New Orleans at the World Horror Convention a couple of years ago, and I was up on the rooftop of this hotel, and every once in a while I have these things happen to me that I can't really explain. They're kind of like daydreams, but they're much more vivid than daydreams. They're kind of like hallucinations, but they're not quite hallucinations, because I know they're not real. But I had this vision of this strange cosmic realm. And this doesn't happen to me very often. It probably happens to me maybe about 2 or 3 times a year, usually when I'm resting, where I'll have these, kind of strange visions, for lack of a better word. And that it was a quite disturbing vision. It was a vision of mutilated angels and this sort of thing. Pretty odd stuff. And admittedly, although in my mind it's kind of par for the course, and so I had that, and that was a powerful image, and it wasn't the complete story, obviously, because with dreams and nightmares and images, they don't have the narrative structure necessary to support a whole length of a story. But it was a good starting point, and that's from there I always kind of work backwards and kind of reverse engineer the story from there, and kind of say what kind of characters and what kind of plot would lead us to a place like this, such as the one I had in my vision, and so that's how the Sadist Bible came about.
And so Mr. Suicide, as I mentioned earlier, won the Bram Stoker Award for first novel. What was your writing journey before getting Mr. Suicide published?
Oh, I was writing a lot of short fiction for a number of years. My writing journey has been very sporadic up until about 2008. I graduated college in 1995, and in 95 and 96, I tried my little heart out to be a writer, but I just didn't have the work ethic and the stability in my life to be able to do that. So I was, sending stories to Anne Vandermeer back when she was Anne Kennedy, and editing a magazine called The Silver Web, and getting well-earned rejections, well-earned form rejections from that magazine and others. And I just kind of ran out of steam. And then I tried again around the year 2000 to 2003, and I even joined a writers group. But in spite of joining a writers group, most of what I did was party with them, and I didn't even get critiques from this writers group. And I even looking back, and I don't understand that one, how that could have worked. And then it was really not until 2008, after I had a bit more maturity, a bit more of a work ethic, and a bit more stability in my life, that I started going to conventions, taking classes at conventions. There used to be a convention in Columbus, Ohio, called Context, that offered workshops, and I took a lot of those, and I just kept writing every day, and mostly short fiction, or actually exclusively short fiction back in those days. And gradually things got longer and longer, and I remember being so proud when I broke through and accidentally wrote my first novella. I was trying to write a short story, and it just got longer and longer and longer and longer until it became a novella. And after that, things got, I was able to sustain a greater length of story, and it just kind of happened on its own, which is good. I did try at one point to write a novel. I actually tried to write a science fiction novel back in around 2010. And I tried to write something that was, really big, and I had this idea that this was going to get me an agent, and it was really kind of trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and so that was some wasted time because it was big and it was bloated and it was ugly and it was awful. And then I decided to really focus on the kind of fiction that I loved the most, which is dark, psychological, emotionally realistic horror fiction. That for me, my approach to horror is basically embracing tragedy, not embracing it in the sense of saying, this is a good thing. Obviously, it's not. But in terms of storytelling, embracing the storytelling of tragedy. And for me, horror is tragedy plus unreality. And that's what my approach is. And so I've developed more confidence over time. It helped that in 2013, I was nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award for a novella. Didn't win, but I was nominated. And so that helped me feel more confident. And really, confidence has been so important to me in my writing journey. I didn't have it early on because I had these other previous attempts at writing that kind of went kerplunk and crashed and burned. And so for me, getting confidence over time is what has allowed me to be myself as a writer. And I don't think we talk about it enough as something that's important to writers. So for me, it's just been essential.
And how do you think you gain that? Just by continuing to write?
Continuing to write, that was helpful. And some of it was simply when good things happen. When a writer I respected gave me a blurb. Children of No One was the novella that was nominated for the Shirley Jackson Award, and it was also blurbed by Thomas Ligotti, who is known in literary horror circles. Actually, now he's one of the few living writers to be published by Penguin Classics. Now that just happened in the last year. So he's become much more widely known, kind of in the wake of True Detective, which that show had apparently some inspiration from him. And it kind of came to light as people were talking about this, and his name started to get mentioned. So when he actually blurbed my work, I was a huge Thomas Ligotti fan and still am. And when that came, it was a recognition of, oh, okay, I'm on the right track. And I'm not it helped with the whole imposter syndrome thing. When you have a writer who you greatly respect, who says something about your work that is very positive. So another thing similar to that happened when Jack Ketchum blurbed another one of my novellas. I wrote a novella called I Am the New God. And Jack Ketchum blurbed that one. And so when those kinds of things happen, and when more short fiction sales are happening and more blurbs are happening, it was basically that was what gave me a lot of confidence. And up until that point, the confidence to move on was just a sense deep inside that I had stories to tell, and that I had that I felt this, kind of deep in the core of my bones, deep in the marrow of my bones, I felt that I needed to be a writer, and that I needed to do this, and that was kind of what sustained me for a while. Sheer stubbornness, and reading a lot also helped, because if you read enough, you kind of get this sense of, well, I could do better than that, which oftentimes is delusional. Oftentimes you can't do better than that. But that delusion is a healthy one in some respects, because it helped launch my writing career, in the sense that I would look at stuff that was being published and say, well, I could do better than that. And that led me to feel a little bit more confident about trying my hand at this. And I think the whole idea that I could do better than that, quote unquote, is, in some ways the delusion that launches a million writing careers. But it's a healthy delusion because it means that you're engaging with what you're reading and looking at its strengths and looking at its weaknesses. And that's kind of the first step, I think, for most writers, is really getting deeply immersed in a text and really appreciating the words and learning to read as a writer reads, which is probably a little bit different than how a general reader reads.
What appeals to you as a writer and a reader about horror fiction?
Well, for me, I always say that I didn't choose horror so much as horror chose me. I was 6 years old when my grandfather died, and so my parents took me to the funeral, and there I am, 6 years old, and my mom takes me up to my grandfather's casket, and of course I have no way of kind of understanding all this. And I see my grandfather there, and I understand he's dead, but I don't really understand what that means. And I didn't know it was taboo really to touch the body, or that it's not something that I was really supposed to do. But I put my hand out and I just patted his hand, a couple of times as if to comfort him. And I felt how damned cold his body was. And at that moment, I always, whenever I'm asked this question, I kind of say that I go back to that and say that's really the moment that I became a horror writer, because I was exposed to death at such a young age that the only way I could wrap my head around it was really the imagination, rather than, any kind of logic or any kind of, traditional religious way of looking at it. And so at that point, that and other difficulties that happened when I was growing up gave me an acknowledgement of the role of tragedy in life and the role of death in life. And at the same time, there was this explosion in pop culture of horror entertainment in the late 70s and 80s, owing itself largely to Stephen King's heyday in publishing. And the rediscovery of a lot of films, from the 50s and 60s that were making their way onto television. And that was how I got my first doses of horror entertainment. I grew up in a very conservative household where horror books were not allowed in the house. Horror movies were not something that we were allowed to see, but they couldn't censor the TV as much. So I got a lot of horror entertainment from television. So it was that perfect storm. And what continues to interest me in it now, all these years later, is that horror fiction acknowledges tragedy in the world. There is certainly a kind of horror fiction that's more escapist, which is an action adventure-y kind of monster hunting sort of thing. Goodness knows lots of people enjoy that, and I'm not here to squash their enjoyment or say that it's inappropriate. But for me, that's not really what drives me to the genre. What drives me to the genre is its exploration of tragedy, its exploration of a sense of unreality tied to that tragedy, the exploration of trauma. That's something that's really important. The exploration of psychological trauma, the aftermath of trauma. Mental illness, addiction, homelessness. These are things that you're not going to find in many other genres of fiction. And horror is really equipped to deal with that and give death and tragedy and violence the grandeur that they deserve in the imagination, and in storytelling. And so it's the ideal tool for me. Like I said, I tried my hand at science fiction at one point in the past, and largely out of concern that it would be more marketable than horror. And I just found it didn't work for me. That's not how my brain works. That's not what I love. And so I'm kind of a literary ghoul, but a happy literary ghoul, and happy to really provide the service of giving a group of readers who like fiction to acknowledge tragedy and trauma, and unreality, and to address the needs of that set of readers, and giving them that emotional experience that they're going to find fulfilling, not because they love this stuff, but because obviously I don't like tragedy, I don't like death. I've seen too much of both to like that. But there's a sense of community that comes when you see that someone is acknowledging these things, that it's not swept under the rug, that it's not, you're not in this polite zone where nobody talks about this kind of stuff, that you can break down that wall and address the taboos and be very clear about it. And I think there's a sense of relief that a lot of horror readers have when they see that this is a place that you can talk about this stuff, even as terrible as it is. It's a place where we can all mourn. And that's one of the things I emphasize to people. I have friends who know I'm a horror writer and don't really get it. And I think they think that horror is about reveling in the violence or reveling in the trauma. And that's not my experience with it. My experience is that I write about these things because I want to mourn them. And I want to provide a space where other people can mourn along with me. And that's the community that we form in horror fiction of acknowledging these things. And so you have the irony of this, really stories about alienation and stories about trauma forming a community. I think people who have been traumatized or alienated are able to see themselves in my work, and therefore we have this community that comes out of the alienation, which is, I think, pretty cool.
You mentioned earlier your conservative childhood and the fact that horror fiction was not allowed. I'm curious, are you still in touch with your family, and what do they think about your writing?
My parents are very, very old, and so when I was as I've become more involved in writing, they've gotten to, my dad had a severe stroke a few years ago, and so he at this point does not always even see and recognize who I am. So and then my mom, I've not really talked to her a whole lot about some of this. I'm in contact with them, but I see them about once a year, and we keep things pretty superficial. And that seems to be the best way to handle it for us. It's kind of like we don't talk about my writing. We talk about my dad, because that's the most important thing, is just taking care of him. And we try to basically to preserve the connection that we do have, which is admittedly a bit superficial. We don't discuss anything that's controversial. And that's kind of the Cold War treaty that we have. It's been interesting, because I'm sure that if my mother did read my fiction, she would be probably gnashing her teeth and rending her garments, to use a biblical phrase. But we, it's interesting when in this kind of situation with family, the decision I've made is it's better to have a connection with them that isn't completely, kind of embracing talking about everything,
Sure.
and just kind of keeping it as it is, and just kind of focusing on that. So, and not bringing up the controversies, but we certainly were at loggerheads for a long time. And, but there comes a point, and, as any listeners out there may know, when you realize that it's, if you can achieve some kind of just static, like I said, a static kind of Cold War peace where we decide we're not going to talk about the controversial stuff. We're just going to hang out and spend time together as a parent and child, then that tends to work out best.
Great. So when you sit down to write, how do you turn off your internal censor?
That's a good question. What I tend to do is remember that there's energy involved in what I'm writing. So even if there's stuff that I feel like I'm crossing a taboo, I try to keep in mind that I can always go back and edit it out later. That helps. It also helps just to know that I have a editor that I can work with. So, for example, with Mr. Suicide, which is very much a work that's taboo crossing and it gets labeled as transgressive fiction. With that, I kept in mind that, okay, if someone buys this book, then I'm going to have a long editing process. And it's not just going to be me standing behind the book. It's going to be my editor, my publisher, etc. And, we will go through things line by line if necessary to really get to, what we feel like, if there's any language that needs to be trimmed out of there. And so that really helps me a lot. Every once in a while, I still have issues where it's like I'm writing a novella right now, actually. And there's a scene that I've thought about putting in there. And it's like, what? Do I want to go there? Is it necessary to go there? And I guess that's the other thing is I typically won't go there unless I feel it is necessary to give it, give the experience its full emotional weight. But yeah, it's not an easy answer, honestly. I mean, it's something where, sometimes it's just a matter of what mood I'm into. Sometimes I feel more adventurous than other times. But I don't feel any regret about anything that I've put in writing, as difficult as some of it is for people to read. It's, again, coming from the place of mourning this kind of stuff, not celebrating it. And I think my readers understand that.
Given your own experiences, and as you talked about earlier, your writing journey, what advice would you have for aspiring writers who might be listening and are interested in writing their own novels or short stories?
I would say, well, there's the basic ones, which are read every day, write every day. That was the advice that helped me the most. Read everything that you can. Read consistently. And when you start to read consistently, you'll start to notice how people do this. And then you'll get better at it, your own work over time. I would also say try to have a sense of objectivity about your work. The way that I think about it is that it's like I'm making soup, and I'm stirring the soup, and I'm putting in different spices, and I'm putting in different ingredients, and I have to take a taste of it every once in a while to see if it's working. And I can lie to myself and tell myself that the soup tastes fine, but if the soup doesn't taste fine, then it doesn't do any good, right? So I have to be objective in the same way as I would be if I'm making something, with cooking, or if if I were to look at a car and I were to put up the hood, I would have to be objective about if my tinkering with the car worked. And with the car, obviously, they will tell you whether it works or not. Fiction is a little bit, is quite a bit more ambiguous about that. But I think being honest with yourself, and I think the other thing, I mean, so much of this is being honest with yourself. Being honest with yourself about the quality of the work, and being honest with yourself about what you want out of writing. I think this is where probably the biggest difficulty that I had early on, and the biggest difficulty I see with other people as well, is people who just want to be a hobbyist writer, which is it's completely cool to do that. But then they get around people who aren't hobbyists, and they decide that they have to approach, they need to try to, get this other brass ring over here, like getting an agent or getting a major book deal or whatever. Or people who want to go after that brass ring, and they decide, well, all I need to really do is be a hobbyist, because all my friends are hobbyists. And I think writing groups can be helpful, but so often they can put blinders on people where you decide to go after the same goals that all your buddies are going after. And so I think it's important to be brutally honest with yourself about what you want out of writing, and really, go towards that ferociously, regardless of what anyone else in your immediate circle wants.
When you sit down to write, are there ever days that you need to do something to jumpstart the process?
Yeah, there are. Sometimes if I am sitting down to write, and if it's been for example, I've been doing a lot of promotional stuff after the release of the Sadist Bible, and so I have this novella that I started before all the promotional stuff, and then there's deadlines coming up, so I've been working on it some more, and going back to it, it's a little bit hard to get back into it, and so what I've done there is borrow a trick that a writer named David Morrell talks about in a book called The Successful Novelist, of kind of writing down a conversation between yourself and your like two parts of yourself, your creative self and the part of you that's having difficulty with this. And it sounds completely nuts, and maybe it is, but it's nuts in a productive way. In the sense that it helps you. It has helped me understand what's going on with me that's blocking. Usually, writer's block is about me. It's usually not about the work. It's usually, for me, writer's block is about a lack of confidence that I have with something, or fear that if I write this, then it's going to come out a certain way, or fear that I've written a great 2/3 of a novella and I'm worried that I'm going to have difficulty driving it home at the end, that the final act is not going to live up to the first two acts. Usually, or sometimes it's because I'm struggling with depression, or I'm struggling with anxiety, or I didn't sleep well the night before. Any one of these things. And so, sometimes I'll write down, this conversation with myself, in a little transcript. And it's kind of like, okay, Nicole, well, you started out with, this scene and you're really not happy with it. Why are you not happy with it? Well, it could be because this reminds me too much of something that interaction that I had with my mom. Oh, really? Let's talk about that. What parts of it, remind you of this interaction with your mom? Well, it reminds me of this, but really it's not like that. And, and from doing that, and Morrell talks about it more in The Successful Novelist, it really has helped me kind of find out what's at the core of my writer's block a lot of the times. And that helps me with getting the way out. And sometimes it helps me see that I'm looking at the story in a completely different way, and I need to make a completely different approach. So that's part of what I'll do if I'm having trouble. If I'm on a roll, then I don't need to do anything in the morning to get started. I'll just go and I'll maybe read over the previous few pages from what I wrote the previous day, just to kind of get a sense to get myself back into the character's mind. But I don't need to do anything, kind of more elaborate than that.
What books and authors have inspired your own writing?
Well, I mentioned Thomas Ligotti. I read Thomas Ligotti. I tried to read him back around 2000, and I really didn't get him. And I kind of put him aside. But then I started reading him again. I read a book of his called Teatro Grotesco, that came out in paperback in, I think, 2009. And I was blown away. It's basically horror fiction that is somewhat related to Lovecraft, but it also is influenced by writers like Borges and writers like Bruno Schultz, and a lot of these really obscure. Borges isn't obscure, and Schultz isn't all that obscure, but there are other writers that he is influenced by that are pretty obscure Eastern European writers, and so it was really opened my mind to what horror could be. I didn't really find the whole let's go out and kill a monster kind of horror attractive. I really didn't find the pulpy stuff as attractive. Sometimes I'll read a pulpy horror book just because I find that to be when I'm hungry for it at that time. But more, I'm interested in stuff that really gets inside the mind, in goes through the layers of the mind. So yeah, Ligotti was definitely one. Poe is another one. Poe is someone who I was exposed to relatively early because I grew up in Maryland, and we took a field trip one time to the Edgar Allan Poe house in Baltimore, and we were also, as a lot of kids in school are taught Poe, we were taught Poe. We read The Telltale Heart, I think, in middle school. And I think with Poe, the language is deceptively simple, but the ideas in the fiction about human nature are so ahead of his time. I mean, he was writing well before Freud, but he has this idea of the imp of the perverse, this idea that there's this unacknowledged but very powerful part of the human psyche that tries to sabotage itself, basically, and does the wrong thing because it's the wrong thing. And so that's definitely an inspiration. Jack Ketchum is another one. Ketchum has been called by Stephen King the scariest guy in America. And he, Stephen King singled him out in the National Book Award speech that King gave a few years back. Talked about him a little bit. So Ketchum, I think, is just the realistic depiction of violence and trauma and its emotional aftermath is really what I got from him. And so those are, and some, some science fiction writers too, Philip K. Dick. I mean, the way he thinks about reality and what reality is and what it isn't, and how do we know what reality is and how do we know what reality isn't, has been truly disturbing sometimes. I mean, there are some Philip K. Dick books that seem to me to be a bit like science fiction horror hybrids. I'm thinking of the name of the one fails me right now. It's the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. That's what I'm thinking of. Truly frightening book. Completely frightening ending. Very Lovecraftian in a way. And then there's another writer who I'll cite is Hubert Selby Jr., which he's a writer who a lot of your audience may not know, but he was really popular in the 60s and 70s, and his book was originally taken to court, I think, in England for they had a indecency trial or something along those lines against him, and so it was very controversial when it first came out. This is a book that he wrote called Last Exit to Brooklyn, which, again, is just very honest about how things like addiction and how things like trauma and their emotional aftermath work. And so those are a lot of the writers who have inspired me. I'm inspired by writers who kind of approach genres in different ways. Who aren't writing the same old, who don't feel compelled to give us a happily ever after, and who are willing to look at the dark side of life because ultimately it's inescapable for all of us.
Sure. So you mentioned earlier this novella that you're working on. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, just in terms of plot?
I can talk a little bit about it. I can talk a little bit about the character, because that's probably what I'm most comfortable with right now. Character's name is Judy. We don't have a last name for her, but she's 58 years old. And when she was 30, I believe, she killed somebody brutally. Has never been suspected of it. Has completely gotten away with it. And has kept her job as a teacher at a community college. She's a community college professor, and has kept that job. But she's completely alienated, and she's an alcoholic, and she drinks to make the guilt go away. And she's constantly worried that she's going to be caught. And she's constantly, when she drinks a lot, she has alcohol withdrawal the next day, and she starts to shake. She has the tremors, and she starts to get really paranoid and thinks that the FBI has put listening devices out in her hallway. And so what I'm interested in kind of doing with this is exploring, this sense of guilt that someone would have after committing a terrible crime. And this person, we don't know why this person is really driven to do these kinds of things, but we know that from a very early age she has been, and it's an obsession with her. And she has not committed a murder after that, but she's haunted by the murder in the sense, not in the sense of regretting it, but in the sense of being worried that she's going to get caught, and the emotional aftermath of that for her, and how she tries to, kind of acknowledge the date of the murder on the anniversary of the murder, and what happens when that acknowledgement of that goes not according to her plan. So, and I don't yet have a title that I'm settled on yet, but this is for a publisher who is going to be putting together a collection of novellas and has invited me to submit one. So, right now I'm about 11,000 words into something that's probably going to be about 18,000 words. So, I feel like it's good, but it's always, I'm a pantser, a fly by the seat of your pants kind of writer. And so I don't outline ahead of time, typically. Sometimes I'll do an outline about halfway through a project after I kind of have a sense of where it's going. But, and so it's been interesting because initially she wasn't a she was a he. And initially it was a different setup entirely, and I had to scrap about 5,000 words and put it aside and say that's not working, and I had to start over, and so I did, and that's kind of like the downside of being a pantser is that you can end up chucking a lot of writing. I know with Mr. Suicide, I end up chucking at least 15 or 20,000 words. It's like of stuff that just wasn't working. But I feel like the stories are stronger because of that. Because even if it's trial and error, that it seems like for me it's a more true way of getting to the character because I'm refining it, almost like the way a sculptor would begin to chisel away at the stone and go deeper at it and kind of over and over through repeated chiseling get the shape that they want. That's kind of how I look at it. That's how I look at revision too. I don't mind revision at all because again it's that that whole delight in getting something right, and being more concerned about that than, concerned about, just getting it done. So yeah, that's a little about that novella.
Great. Where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about you and your fiction?
Well, the one-stop shopping place would be NicoleCushing.com. And when I say shopping place, I'm just using that as an analogy or a metaphor. There's actually nothing to shop for there. But that's my blog. That's my, you can find my bio. You can find all kinds of things there. You can find out how to sign up for my postcard club, where I will send you a weird postcard every month, free of charge. Just as a way of staying in touch with folks. So that's another thing. If you want to keep the postal service employed and avoid the email thing, I will send you a postcard once a month. So NicoleCushing.com is the website, and that's NicoleCushing.com. Some people want to try to put an H in Nicole. There's no H in Nicole. And then I'm also on Facebook and on Twitter at Nicole Cushing. And if you really want to be old fashioned, you can email me, right? And that's NicoleCushingWriter@gmail.com. And, I love hearing from folks. So, I have a great group of readers, who are, in my opinion, I know I'm biased, but they're smarter than the average bear. And I'm just delighted to hear from them. So, give me a call, or not a call. Give me an email.
Great.
Okay.
Again, we've been speaking with Nicole Cushing. Cushing's novel, Mr. Suicide, was awarded the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a First Novel. Nicole, thanks for doing this interview.
Great to be here.
Not since flying reindeer have the holidays seen something so amazing. Just in time to make selfie-ready holiday hair easy. Introducing the do-it-all styling tools for glam holiday hair. The holidays are happier with glam hair. And the Knot Doctor all-in-one dryer brushes from Conair makes it easy. Detangle, dry, and style in one step. No elf needed. The Knot Doctor collection has a dryer brush for every hair type and style. The pink smoothing paddle dryer brush has Flexolite bristles for painless detangling and high-performance power for quick styling and smooth, shiny results. And the purple dryer brush comes with a bonus volumizing attachment to boost lift and volume at the roots. It's perfect for salon blowouts at home. And since they're ideal for every hair type and length, they make great gifts for everyone on your list who wants beautiful hair without the hassles. Shop the Knot Doctor dryer brushes at Conair.com or at your favorite retailers now.